Hello, friends. I'm Kush Khandelwal, and this is Ageless Athlete. A few years ago, I started asking questions that would not leave me alone. Why do some people keep pushing mentally, physically, spiritually long after others burn out or break down? What does it really mean to age well when you still crave movement, meaning, and mastery? This show is my search for answers. Each week, I talk to elite athletes, everyday adventurers, and pioneering researchers who are stretching the limits of what's possible across age, injury, illness, and self doubt. You will hear hard won lessons, untold stories, and science backed strategies for building a body and mindset that lasts. For those of us joining for the first time, welcome to the show. For the rest, thank you for joining us again. Time is our most valuable asset, and I deeply appreciate you giving me your time today.
Friends, welcome back to Ageless Athlete. I have not provided my whereabouts on the podcast for a while now, but I am here in the middle of the Rockies in Western US in the state of Wyoming. And I am in this small town called Ten Sleep and enjoying the excellent rock climbing and just being here in the middle of nature. It has been beautiful indeed. It's been a great summer. And today's episode is something a little different. Every few months, I like to pause and reflect on the conversations that left a mark, the ones that stayed with me long after I said goodbye and stopped the recorder. This is one of those moments. What you are about to hear is a curated selection from some of our most meaningful interviews this past quarter. These clips aren't just impressive achievements or highlight reels, they are stories that touch on something deeper: what it means to grow older in your body, to wrestle with identity, to find joy in reinvention, or to keep showing up when no one is watching. If one of these moments moves you, I hope you will go back and listen to the full episode, because each one of these guests brought something powerful, personal, and uniquely their own. And together, they remind us that aging, pushing limits, overcoming barriers isn't just about slowing down. It's about deepening into who we are. Sarah Thomas is known for doing what no one else on earth has done, like swimming 4 consecutive crossings of the English Channel. Yes, crossing the English Channel nonstop 4 times, and all after surviving cancer. What moved me most, though, in this conversation wasn't just the scale of her swims, it was the way she talks about potential, not in the abstract, motivational poster way, but as a quiet personal compass. In this clip, Sarah shares a story from her childhood that shaped how she views effort, fulfillment, and knowing deep down that you haven't yet hit your limit. It's about chasing your own edge, not somebody else's.
Let me add this. I didn't tell this earlier, but we were talking about my childhood. So I was always like a super average pool swimmer, right? I worked really hard. I loved the water, but I was average. And I remember, I don't know, it's probably 11 or 12. And my overhearing like my mom talking to one of my swim coaches, and he was telling her like, yeah, I have a good work ethic. And if I worked hard, I had a lot of potential to achieve almost whatever I wanted. And I remember going home and asking my mom, like, what does potential mean? And she said, well, that means, you can do so many things if you put in the work to do it. And so I think even from a young age, I just had this desire to like fulfill my potential. Right. And so I knew, even though I was an average pool swimmer, like I worked hard because it was an effort to just like make sure I was the best that I could be. Maybe it wasn't like better than you, it wasn't better than, anyone else, but it was better than me. So I think I just grew up with this feeling of like whatever my best looks like, that's what I need to be achieving. And so as I'm like starting to do these longer swims, when I did the English Channel for the first time in 2012, I swam across. I'm standing in France and it's like this beautiful sunset and this like super special moment. And I will never forget, I'm standing on this beach in France and I'm looking back in England and I'm thinking like, I can do more. There's more left in me. And so I think this chase for longer swims is just trying to find out like, where's my limit? What does more look like for me? And I think when you look at it that way of like, man, I did this 80-mile swim. No one else has ever swum that far before, but like, I haven't maxed out my potential yet. And so I think that's where like you keep wanting to find that next step. I've never been done. I will say I was done after my 100-mile swim, right? Like that was a limit, and I don't necessarily know that I need to push past 100 miles. I'm happy with that. That took all that I had, everything in me to finish that swim. And so that gives you like just a sense of peace. And so now it's like, I can just do whatever I want. I know that I've pushed, I've met my potential. There's so many fun swims out there. What else can I potentially achieve? And that's where something like the 4-way English Channel comes into play. It's like, this is a really cool swim that's within my wheelhouse. It's within my potential. And I always tell people like, if you can do something, you should, because there's no limit to what we can achieve other than like what we set our minds on. And I do feel like I, maybe more so than other people, don't put a limit on what I believe I can achieve in the water. And that just opens so much for you when your mind is open to like, I can do that. Like, that's not a limit. I've done several swims over these years where people were like, that's an impossible swim. In 2013, my friend Craig and I swam down and back across Lake Tahoe. People had tried that swim and nearly died trying to do that swim. They said it was impossible. Like, people are like, there's no way you can do a double Lake Tahoe. And I was like, what's so hard about that? Like, it's colder water, but it's not super cold. It's altitude similar to Denver. Like, I can go do that. And so I think I just got all of these swims where I've practiced turning. I've practiced doing things that people had said were impossible. So by the time you get to the English Channel, you can push away all that noise. People telling me like, it's impossible. You're a cancer survivor. Like, who do you think you are? You've only swum the English Channel one time. Like, you can't do this. Like, you can just push all that out. Like, they don't matter. What matters is like, I know what I've achieved. I know what I believe, and I know what I can dream of.
I think this is such a core human gift in a way, which is to have the curiosity to find what our limits are. To those of us who are not swimmers, maybe not even athletes, how can those people find what their limits are, and how can that really enhance the quality of their life?
I talk to people about this, right? Because it doesn't have to be swimming. It can be anything. For some people, like, their jobs are their passion. Teachers, like, think about the lives that you're impacting as a teacher. Maybe it's just like knitting, like, I just think that as a human, we all have something within us that we love, that brings us joy, right? And maybe your goal isn't to like max out your potential, but I do think that you should be finding your joy in whatever form that looks like, that's meaningful to you. And I can't tell you what that is. I can't discover that for you, right? I didn't discover my like true passion and joy. I was 25. And I would still say I'm still searching for some of it, you know what I mean? But I think we all have something in us that brings us joy, and you shouldn't ignore it. I think some of us, we get so busy in like work and raising kids or just like the day to day, we forget to focus on the thing that brings us joy. And I think all of us would be better if we took an hour a day, you know, or 30 minutes a day, put that passion into the thing that brings us joy. And so I don't think you have to like break world records or swim yourself until you can't think anymore. You know, as long as you're finding those moments where you can, to focus on yourself and do the things that bring you like true joy and true happiness. I think we'd all be better off if we did a little bit more of that.
What about people, Sarah, who actually have not discovered that passion?
Mhm.
You know, we are going through, I don't know, some kind of mental health crisis in
Sure.
this country and in this world. And I think maybe a part of that is because people don't know where to turn to. And
Yeah.
it is great if one already has that in some way, and one can maybe just dig away the dirt and get back to pursuing that thing that they have. But if you don't have that, and I think you coach people, and you also, I think, speak at events. And I'm just curious, what would you tell people on how to find that dream?
Sure.
Where should they start with?
Yeah. And it's hard. I have a pretty good amount of like mental health struggles within my family. So I feel like that question like really strikes close to home for me because, you know, I have people that I love very much who have a hard time finding that joy and knowing how to even start. Because there is despair and sadness and, you know, every emotion that kind of gets in your way of finding that. And I'll say, number one, it always helps if you have like an actual real mental health professional by your side, because they'll probably help you more than I can. But, you know, I think part of it is just giving yourself the room and the peace and the space to just try, right? You don't have to, be swimming the English Channel 4 times on day one, right? Day one is just like walking into the swimming pool and swimming one length. And no matter where you're at, you can always swim the equivalent of one length of the pool, right? So if that's just, picking up a pencil and drawing a sketch, if that's going outside and walking around the block, or, whatever it is that gets you moving forward to step number one, and then feeling like you can accomplish step number one, and then that gives you the freedom and ability to go to step number two, and then maybe 3 or 4, and just wherever that takes you. But I know sometimes the hardest part is just finding step one. And sometimes you have to repeat step one a million times. But my belief is that there's always something, right? There's something within each of us that it makes us individuals, that makes us unique, and that can bring us joy. And I can't find it for you, but hopefully you have the just the mental strength and the ability to start with step one, because that's where it all starts, is with just that first step of beginning.
I've been thinking a lot about energy, not just in training, but in recovery, in focus, in how we age. So when I came across NutriSense, it hit home. It's a program that pairs a 24/7 glucose biosensor with a dedicated dietitian to help you understand how your body responds to food, stress, sleep, and movement, and then act on the data. I chose it because I wanted something real, not another hack or one size fits all plan, just honest insight into what's actually going on inside me and how to build habits that last. NutriSense has helped over 150,000 people take that step. And if you want to try it, you can get 33% off your first month with code ageless15 at nutrisense.io. Again, that's nutrisense.io, code ageless15. You can also find this information on the show notes for this episode. Bob Becker started running in his 50s. Now, at age 80, he's still showing up to some of the hardest ultramarathons in the world. In this moment, Bob talks about what happened when he ran a race and did not make the cutoff. It is easy to celebrate the wins, but Bob's lesson is about something deeper: how we show up when the outcome doesn't go our way, how we make peace with that effort, how we walk away with our head held high. It's about resilience, yes, but also grace. And in a culture that's obsessed with winning, this clip reminds us that there is power in showing up. There is another kind of strength.
I've also heard this being said that pain is a given in ultra running, and but suffering is a choice. So, do you believe that? And then, yeah, how do you, Bob? How do you personally separate pain from suffering when you are 100 miles deep into a race, and then everything hurts?
Well, unfortunately, I've had my share of DNFs, did not finish races as well, Marathon des Sables being the first one because they wouldn't let me with a broken femur. And it's always humbling, but you also learn a lot from it, which is that, it's, I like to say, and it's not original, I suppose, but the pain unless it's a real life-threatening kind of a thing or permanent injury kind of a thing, pain is temporary. And the bragging rights when you finish are forever. You chose to be out there, and the idea, the sense of accomplishment when crossing the finish line for me is pretty overwhelming. And so when I'm in that pain cave and really hurting and don't want to continue, and asking myself, what the hell am I doing out here? I always try to take a moment and offset that with the notion that I chose to be here. And at the point at which I cross that finish line, it may take me a little while to recover, but I will recover. And I'll be awfully glad that I finished and I didn't stop, didn't have that DNF, because whenever I have one, there was always deep regret, no matter what the reason is. I had a unfortunate experience. I had a one-time opportunity to run Western States and got to get out there about Truckee at about, 4 or 5 days before the race to get acclimated and get organized. And I immediately developed a very bad cold and a lung infection. So here's my one and only opportunity, having been awarded a special entry to run Western. And basically, I couldn't do it. I went to the start line, but I just missed the cutoff, the first cutoff at 30 miles, and I was done. And absolutely the most devastating race that I've ever had. And yet it wasn't anything I could really do about it, But the point is, when you don't finish a race, it's very, very frustrating. And you want to absolutely minimize that feeling whenever you can. So if your feet are blistered or whatever, aches and pains, you kind of work through them, and it's mind over matter. You may know of a Canadian ultra runner and adventurer whose name is Ray Zahab, And I love something that Ray said a number of years ago. He said, ultra running is 90% mental and the rest is in your head. I just love that idea because obviously you have to train, but it is a mental game. There's no question about it. And I try to keep that in mind.
For sure. And actually, Ray has been on the podcast.
Okay.
And I encourage people to listen to Ray's episode as well. He shared some, incredible words of wisdom, including, I think he talked about this one as well. You talked about this for sure. DNFs are unfortunate because there's so much preparation that has gone in, and some of these opportunities are rare, like being invited and making time to come to California, for example, for the Western states. Again, curious, Bob, talk to us maybe about maybe one of the worst moments that you've had to push through, because like running is an incredible activity. A lot of us will go running and then we will often stop because we're like, okay, you know what? We are tired now. This is hurting. But being able to complete an ultra run requires one to push through sometimes really deep moments. So is there like a particular moment that comes to mind when things were incredibly brutal, but you kept going?
Yeah, I suppose the best example was 3 years ago at Badwater, 2022. And I was trying to set the record as the oldest finisher at 77 at the time. And I was doing well. I was on track. My time was good. But the further down the course I got, I think the problem probably started after about 100 miles. So I had another 35 miles to go, including a 13-mile climb up Mount Whitney to the finish line. And my back started giving out, and I started leaning, not to the side, but leaning forward. And I just couldn't straighten up. It was really bothering me a lot. And by the time I got into Lone Pine, I was almost bent in half. I mean, my body, I looked like an L shape or something. And it wasn't so much pain as it was just the inability to stand up straight and to move in a normal way. And it was putting pressure on my legs, and it was not good. Well, I still had a lot of time, in theory, to finish the race. So I started up the mountain, and by the time I got within about a mile of the finish line, not only had my back seized up and was totally worthless, but my legs began to seize up as well. And I literally had to use my hands to help my legs one step at a time. I'd go 12 or 15 steps, and I had to stop and take a break and try to straighten up a little bit and then do it again. And as I approached the finish line, even closer, that just wasn't working. So it turned out that the race medical director was walking alongside me, being sure that I wasn't that I was okay. That first of all, I was lucid. Secondly, that I wasn't going to have any permanent damage. And I wasn't. I was fine. I was totally lucid. It was just my back. And at one point I said to her, if I could change up the muscle movement a little, maybe that would help. I said, is there any reason why I couldn't get out on all fours and bear crawl a little bit? And she thought about it and said, well, the rule is you have to get to the finish line under your own power. So, why not? So I did. I did some bear crawling up that mountain for a while and stood up and walked and then bear crawled again. And I wound up finishing, but I wound up finishing 17 minutes over the 48-hour cutoff. That was one of the most difficult and frustrating experiences of my life. But I wasn't going to not finish that day, and I didn't care what was involved. And I just was bound and determined to make it. And there were a lot of people up there urging me on and helping me, encouraging me to do what I could to finish. And I suppose that's the best example I can give you of a kind of a tough day.
Friends, It means a lot that you're here. I pour a ton of heart into the show. The research, the interviews, the editing, it's all me, trying to share stories that matter. If Ageless Athlete has ever made you feel seen, inspired you, or just kept you company on a long drive, or better, over a run or a bike ride, I would be so grateful if you considered supporting it. Even a small amount helps keep it going, helps keep bringing the show to you for free. You can chip in at buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. Again, buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. You can find the link on the show notes as well. Thank you for listening and for being part of this. Before triathlons became sleek and serious, they were scrappy, chaotic, and full of heart. Bob Babbitt was there at the beginning. In this clip, he tells one of his favorite stories from the early days of Ironman, back when athletes were fueling on Big Macs and taping bananas to their bikes. Yes, it is hilarious, but it is also this reminder of how far passion and play can take you, even when nothing is figured out yet. You were there in 1980 racing Ironman before most people even knew what a triathlon was. So, Bob, take us back.
Sure.
What was it like stepping into an event so raw, maybe experimental, where no one really knew what it was humanly, possible to finish that?
Well, it's funny, at the time in 1978, I moved here to San Diego from Chicago, and then Ned Overend, who went on to become world mountain bike champion, but mountain bikes hadn't been invented back then. The two of us met rock climbing down in Mexico, and we became roommates. And then we read in 1979 in an article in Sports Illustrated about this thing called the Ironman. And in 78, 15 people had started it and 12 finished, and the same in 79. So it's not like it was catching on. But the fascinating part was in when we read the article in 79, again, it was like an 8 to 10 page article in Sports Illustrated, which was sort of the Bible for all of us back then. And it's like, why would it be such a long article on such a teeny event, 15 idiots? And it's a 2.4 mile swim. And little history is there had been a article earlier in 77 in Sports Illustrated that said that the world's best endurance athlete was Eddie Merckx, who had won the Tour de France 5 times. And so there was a event on the island of Oahu called the Perimeter Relay. And John Collins, who had learned about the sport of triathlon when he lived in Coronado with his family, the early triathlons were held at Fiesta Island starting in 74 in San Diego. He and his family had done these events. So they just did this run around the island of Oahu, a relay run. And the article on Eddie Merckx had come out, and all of them started arguing about, well, wait a second, why is a cyclist the greatest endurance athlete? Well, we're runners. Why can't it be us? And if you're living on an island, you're sort of doing swimming, you're doing cycling, you're doing running as a group. And so after this argument was going on for a while, John Collins gets up and goes, listen, we're going to find out once and for all who the best endurance athlete. We're going to take the Waikiki rough water swim, 2.4 miles, the Around Oahu bike ride, 112 miles, and the Honolulu Marathon, which is 26.2 miles. We'll put all three of them together and we'll call the winner the Ironman. And then he promptly sat down and forgot about it. And then since he was working in the Navy over there, one of the guys there kept saying, sir, when are we going to do that iron thing, sir? So in February of 1978, he put on the first ever Ironman triathlon. And in 79, it happened again. And we read the article, and the guy who won it in 79 was a guy named Tom Warren, who lived here in San Diego. And he put on an event called the Tug Swim Run Swim that Ned and I had done. And it was one of those classic events. It was a half-mile swim around this Crystal Pier in San Diego, a 5-mile run on the beach, and you swam around the pier again. But you didn't stop at the finish line. Tom Warren owned a thing called Tug's Tavern. So the idea was you came across the finish line and ran a few more blocks to his tavern, because the first 75 people got breakfast, right? You got breakfast, runny eggs, and a Tug's glass. And that's what the bragging rights were, because you were standing there with your breakfast and your glass when the 76th guy got there and got nothing. So that was a draw. But Ned and I would do that event. So anyways, we called Tom Warren up and said, Mr. Warren, sir, can you tell us about this iron thing? Because it's not like you go online and find out how to do it, where to do it, how to train. Nobody knew. So Tommy goes, hey, yeah, Babbitt, come down to my office, which is just south of Crystal Pier on the west side of the street. So I go down there with Ned, and we're like, there's no buildings there. There's a motorhome, right? There's a parking lot, and there's a bike on the back of this motorhome, and there's a paddleboard on top, and there's running shoes tied around the side view mirror on the outside. And Babbitt and Tommy's like, Babbitt, welcome to my office. And he had a payphone behind him. So he owned a tavern. So he would go for a swim and go for a paddle in the ocean, get a 5-mile run in, payphone behind him, go call and order chips or salsa or other crap for his bar. And then he'd go ride his bike up to Oceanside and back. And so he was doing this triathlon stuff, that was his lifestyle. That's what he's doing. So he invites us to the bar. This is 9:30 in the morning. The bar behind his motorhome called T.D. Hayes, and Ned and I are sitting there. And again, this is our mentor. This is a guy who's going to show us how to do this thing. And he's drinking beer 9:30 in the morning, and then he's got a magic marker. And he's got this magic marker, and every time he takes a drink, he makes a mark on his arm. And I'm like, Mr. Warren, sir, what's the deal with the magic marker? He goes, well, I have a little bit of a drinking problem. When I get to my sleeve, I go home. And we're like, oh, okay. You are an absolute crazy person. Then he took us to his house, and he had a bike mounted in the sauna, and he'd ride 5 hours a day in the sauna, to get ready for the heat of Hawaii. So Ned and I went to a police auction, and we bought bikes at a police auction. My bike was $75. The whole back end was burnt in a fire, and covered that up with duct tape. And, both of us really didn't know what this thing was. All I knew was that I was going to put pannier, sleeping bag, and tent on the bike, because I thought you swam 2.4, rode 56, camped out, rode back the next day, and then ran the marathon. And, we had no idea that you're supposed to do a whole thing in one day. That was the silliest thing ever. In fact, when we went over there to do the event, Ned's girlfriend, Pam, that he ended up marrying, she lost him in the first half mile of the bike. So when she finally caught him at mile 90, he was in the median strip drinking out of sprinklers, because she had any aid in 90 miles, right? Yeah. My crew gave me a Big Mac fries and a Coke at mile 25, your own support crew, root beer snow cone at mile 90. And then when I came off the bike, I heard this music, and I saw this, boom box and a bamboo mat. And I'm like, what's going on? My crew was like, how about a massage? I'm like, you know what? I could use a massage. I had a 45-minute massage between the bike and the run, probably the longest transition in Ironman history. It felt great. And they had scales set up along the bike ride and the run, because they came up with some science. I don't know where they came up with it. They would have you get off the bike and get weighed. And, during a run, same thing. If you lost 5% of your body weight, they pulled you out of the race because they thought it was dangerous. But again, nobody knew what we were doing. So I get off the bike, and who knew nutrition back then? I had Hawaiian sweetbread and Gatorade. That's what I had. My crew was giving me that. So I get weighed as we start the run, and then drinking Gatorade and eating Hawaiian sweetbread. And I'd get to about mile 5 and you get on the scale. And I could hear the guy in the walkie-talkie. He's like, hey, can you give me that again? The guy's gained 5 pounds. What's he doing? So then we're running along. In the last part of the run, you run up Diamond Head and you run down into Kapilani Park. And I'm running up Diamond Head. My crew is behind me in their Fiat convertible, lighting up the road. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the coolest thing. I didn't know I could do this. I was going to do this in 2 days. I'm going to finish this in 1 day. And I'm running up Diamond Head. The crew's behind me. I start thinking there's going to be cheerleaders at the finish, and all sorts of excitement. I can't wait to get there. It's going to be awesome. I come running into the park. I look up. There's like a light bulb above me. There's a chalk line on the road. And I hear a voice in the darkness. It's like, hey, yeah, you in the race? Yeah, you're done. That's it. It was that guy sitting in the park, one guy doing 1-arm push-ups, and me. It was like, but it was something about that event that I finished it, and I was like, I changed my perception of me. I knew that I now had this business card that told me I could accomplish anything. I could change my perception of myself. So I just became an evangelist for this silly sport of triathlon.
Bill Ramsey is a philosophy professor and a high-level climber. He's spent decades exploring hard routes and harder questions. In this moment, he unpacks why we voluntarily choose suffering, why people run 100 miles, climb until failure, or push through discomfort on purpose. It is thoughtful, maybe a little poetic, and offers a glimpse into the inner life of someone who believes that meaning isn't found in ease, but in effort.
But let's talk about this idea of the pain box.
Okay, perfect.
Apparently that term is associated with you in some way. So tell us, what is that all about?
Okay. So I mean, I think I came up with this kind of as an attitude where I think I was studying Stoic philosophy a little bit maybe at the time, but it seemed like in training and like dieting, you're constantly being bombarded with, oh, here's a way you can get stronger. Here's a way you can lose weight. And you don't actually have to, you can eat everything you want, or you don't actually have to train. Just do this for 5 minutes and you'll have everything you need. And you'll get much, much stronger. And it's all crap, right? I mean, it's all BS. And so a sort of approach that I like is to, no, you are going to deal with pain. You have pain in your life and you should just accept that. And don't think that you can get by without accepting the amount of pain that's actually going to exist in your life. However, one thing you can engage in is what I call pain reallocation. Okay. So like say this piece of paper, let's suppose that this piece of paper, this volume represents all the pain in your life. Okay. But there's 2 different kinds of pain. And imagine that this volume is separated by a divider. And so let's say that on this side is the kind of pain that's associated with hard work, sacrifice, discipline, really, things that you normally know you should be doing, but maybe you're not doing. And then on this side is the sort of pain associated with dissatisfaction, not achieving your goals, failing in various ways, not being fulfilled. And so the way to think about this, I mean, this is just a geometric representation of something I think we all deep down know, is this divider is not going to reduce the overall amount of pain in your life, but you can engage in pain reallocation where this kind of pain, which I think most people want less of, the pain associated with failure and not achieving your goals, can be reduced. You can move the divide over so that quantity of pain becomes much, much less. But the only way that's going to happen geometrically is if you substantially increase this amount of pain. And that means you have to work harder and have more discipline. So that's what the pain box is about. So there's this pain reallocation where you can swap out this kind of suffering for this kind of suffering, but that means there's more hard work involved. And then if you back off the hard work, of course, there'll be less suffering in that sense and devotion and dedication, but then you're going to have a much greater volume of the kind of pain associated with not achieving your goals and dissatisfaction. So I kind of came up with that because what it does is it helps make very vivid the geometry of how I kind of live my life, basically, which is, it's a kind of way of putting no pain, no gain. And only it's like, I realized that, wow, I really do want to have more success and I really do want to achieve certain goals. But given this sort of geometric representation, I can see that there's a direct inverse relation between that and how much hard work I do. And so that's what kind of motivated me to come up with the paying box.
No pain, no gain, for sure. Anybody who's been in the game long enough can likely identify with that. I want to go back to the philosophy side for a second. I mean, Bill, you're a very thoughtful person. Is there a philosophical idea or framework that's helped you push through some of that, again, pain or failure? Or you talked about, I guess, stoicism for a second there. Is there something like that that's kind of helped you frame that and
I mean,
forward?
There's maybe my interpretation of stoicism, but whenever I talk to somebody who really knows stoicism, they're like, "Oh, no, that's way too much of an oversimplification," and that's kind of a pop philosophy perspective. I mean, I don't know. I do feel like there is a kind of ideological commitment that I have there that goes all the way back to when I was a little boy. And I know my father once told me this. I grew up on a cattle ranch, but the bottom line is that he's like, you need to accept that nothing comes easy. But if you work hard, it will come. And that's the difference, is working hard. And I think as a kid, I came to appreciate that I wasn't a really terribly good athlete. In most sports, it seems like other kids were better, just naturally gifted athletes. But I then came to appreciate that I did have a kind of gift where I could outperform other kids just by being tougher than them, frankly, and working harder and trying harder. And I could do that. That was the one thing I could do. Psychologically, I was tougher than them and I could work harder than they were. When I was in high school, we had this thing called the Marine Corps Physical Fitness Test. And it was pretty grueling. I mean, it was a lot of, you had to do 100 sit-ups in 2 minutes, and then you had to do 60 push-ups and pull-ups for like 30. And you only had like a few minutes in between each event. And there was no coach or anything. So that's why I first started self-coaching. That's why I first started figuring out what kind of work I needed to do to actually do well in this. And it was kind of a place of pride in Madras High School, because we would always go up against the big Portland schools and we would always win. We were uniquely good at that. And so I took that quite seriously. And I think my senior year, I had the highest score in the country for that particular test. And that's when I first really came to appreciate that I like this process of self-coaching. And I also came to appreciate that, regardless of what your natural talents are, I mean, obviously at some level it makes a difference, but at this level, it can all be overcome by just hard work and sacrifice. And I think, what you see at the top level, at the very Olympic level, is you have people who understand that, but they also are naturally gifted. And so they get the whole package. But, even as sort of rank amateurs, you can actually go pretty far by just toughing it out and working hard and sacrifice and having discipline. And so that's always been my kind of underlying perspective, my underlying philosophy.
Hello, friends. Just a quick break. This is not an ad. If you have been enjoying these conversations, I would love for you to subscribe to my newsletter. It is where I go deeper, sharing stories, reflections, and behind the scenes insights that don't always make it into the podcast. I write about what I'm learning from elite athletes and how to stay ageless in body and mind. If you have ever wanted a thoughtful, inspiring read that ties it all together, training, aging, mindset, and all, you will love this. You can find the link in the show notes or just head to agelessathlete.co. Again, www.agelessathlete.co, that is, to sign up. And yeah, just a couple of emails a month. And You can unsubscribe anytime. Absolutely no spam ever. Okay, back to the show.
Bianca Valenti is one of the pioneers of big wave surfing. She is known for surfing some of the largest, tallest, and yes, just the most gnarly big waves on this planet. But when I asked her about her proudest moment in the sport, it was not about some huge wave that she has surfed. It was about how she won the right for equal pay for women in the sport, and why this moment means so much to her and for the world of surfing and for sports at large.
Is there a moment from your big wave surfing career that you get the most pride from?
Most, I mean, yeah, the most pride is definitely winning the fight for equal pay. Yeah. But then, by the way, when I saw my friend get that barrel, that wasn't exactly the moment that lit the fire. That was like where I was like, okay, there's something here. But I actually had a near-death experience here at Ocean Beach. That was really the true moment that lit the fire. Where I was still in college and I was a senior and I was visiting my friend at UC Santa Cruz, and it was the first swell of the season in November. And we got up really early and started checking all the spots, and everywhere was crowded. And Santa Cruz at the time even had like an even more intimidating localism factor than anywhere else in the state. And so we just started driving north, and we kept driving, and we got to Ocean Beach, to VFW's at the beach chalet in between Fulton and Lincoln. And we saw like perfect waves. It was sunny, offshore, nobody out. And we were like, oh my gosh, like I was thinking of, when people are coming across the Oregon Trail and they get to California and they're like, Eureka, we found gold. And so I thought that this was it. I was like, we just struck gold. And so what we had no idea was how big the waves are, because there was no scale, there was no people, and we didn't know what we were doing. And so we were both good surfers at the time already, but didn't have the right gear and weren't prepared to go out into what we went out in. So we just, we paddle out, and we actually choose, like I was already a lifeguard. And so I knew the ocean. And so jump into a rip and have a nice, pretty easy paddle out. And then there's this one really big whitewater, like 15 feet of whitewater. And I was like, wow, that's a pretty big whitewater duck dive. Go under that one. And then the next wave was just absolutely psychotic. It was like a 2-story house, and it was just throwing out, like squaring off. And it was the biggest wave I had ever seen in my life, about to break 10 feet in front of me. And so I was going to have to absorb all the power of the wave. I wasn't able to just like get under it before that point. And so I looked at my friend, and he said, well, see you on the other side. And I thought, like, do I try to duck dive this wave, or do I bail my board? Because I've just got this comp light leash, which is like dental floss. And I decided to try to duck dive it, and immediately the board's ripped out of my hands, and I am just like experiencing violence like I've never had this kind of experience before, and I'm just getting like, ragdolled and flipping and twisting and spinning, and I am just getting completely throttled, completely demoed, and finally the violence stops, and I opened my eyes, and all I could see was black, and I had no idea which way was up. And then my feet touched the sand, and I pressed off the sand, and I think it took me like 3 strokes to get to the surface. I mean, I had no energy, so I'm just like very slowly making my way to the surface. And I had this thought of like, oh, if there's another wave, I will be dead. And it was just absolute fact. There was no, I didn't have any energy to have any emotion about it. It was just like, yeah, if there's another wave, I'm dead, because I am like, I have no gas in the tank right now. And I got to the surface and I was just gasping for air, and my whole entire body was started to convulse, like parts of my neck, my fingers, and I had complete battery acid in my legs from lack of oxygen. And I saw my friend, he was there, and he was like, I'm going in. And I was like, yeah, me too. And so finally get back to the sand. And I just stood there looking at those waves like, I want to surf those waves. I know I can do it, and I need to get the right gear, put in the hard work, and that's what I want to do. And I knew it at that moment. And then he he did not have the same experience. He ended up moving to Montana and becoming a fly fisherman. And then actually later we went to Fort Point, and Fort Point was like gigantic and barreling. Nobody's out again. And I'm like, Parker, let's go out. And he was like, I'll film you. And I just thought, I was like, this looks easy compared to what we just did. And immediately get like paddle out, immediately get pinned down on a rock. And there was no way I could. It was the same thing. I didn't have the right gear, not the preparation. But I don't know, like that was just how my mind worked. I was like, I see perfect waves, I want to try to surf them. And so yeah, that was the moment where I was just like, after that day, I never looked back. I committed fully, and then yeah, it's been an epic ride and a long ride and a ton of hard work and a steep learning curve where kind of once again I just same thing I did when I was a kid, like picked as many people's brains as I could, begged people to let me tag along in the beginning, and begged the first person who I got a gun from to surf Mavericks. I had to beg him to make me the board and promise him that I wouldn't die because I was a woman, to buy a board from him. And in the process, I realized that like there was this power that was really impactful when people would see women surf big waves, that they would have their minds opened to like what women can do, and their whole perception of like what women are capable of would change and switch. And so along the way, I started surfing contests again, and one of them was the Big Wave event at Nelscott Reef, Oregon in 2014. That was part of the Big Wave World Tour. And that was a really pivotal moment in my career because I met Paige Alms, Andrea Moeller, and Keala Kennelly, and also it was the first time that a big wave surf event was broadcast live on the internet. And so we went out, we surfed the first hour of the day. There were 13 of us, and we just had a really positive experience and really great feedback from everybody who watched live online, having that experience of like, wow, we've never seen women surf big waves. And so at that moment, after that event, I ended up winning, which was also like fired me up because I'm a competitor and I love winning. And I was like, well, we should be on the whole entire Big Wave World Tour, because at the time the men had a 6-event tour. And and so I went to all the women at the time, and I was like, hey, there's something here. I don't know what it is, but we should all make a pact to stick together, just like Billie Jean King did in tennis. And most of them were like, we don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. Except for Paige, Keala, and Andrea were like, yeah, we're with you. Together, we formed the Committee for Equity in Women's Surfing, and we got the state of California to back us. At first, we were just asking for access to compete at Mavericks. And then eventually we also started asking for equal pay as well. And we got the California. So first we got the California Coastal Commission to back us. And next we got the California State Lands to back us, which is even bigger than the Coastal Commission. And so in that process, we were able to kind of back WSL into a corner and win equal pay for all women in surfing.
Rob Matheson is a rock climber from the UK. And at the age of 74, Rob just climbed an iconic route at the sea cliffs of Wales. It is a very hard and committing route where a slip, a fall can result in serious injury or even death. So Rob talks about the climb, but what stood out to me was what came after: a soft, powerful reflection on aging and identity, and the question we all face at some point: who am I when I'm no longer performing my peak? Like, what made you so prepared to be able to attempt, I think in my mind, something pretty audacious in your 70s?
Well, I haven't climbed all my life. I had 8 years off climbing in the 80s. I started climbing in 1957 when I was 7 years old. Ever since then, I've been in the mountains and learning how to climb, initially with my dad, and then my mum came along, so it was a family unit. And then as I grew older into a teenage years, I started going out with some mates. By the time I was 18, I'd done all the hardest routes in the Lake District. And I'd done all the hardest routes in Wales as well, because we used to go down to Wales a lot. So I'd ticked all the routes off in the guidebook. And I felt then I had earned the right to do new routes, because I just felt, you've got to earn the right to do something special, and to put a new route up is special. So that's when I started doing new routes. And in 1969, I did my first new route, which was called Paladin in the Lake District, which was probably one of the first E3s in the Lake District. And then E3 at that time was quite hard. So I've just worked up through the grades and right through the 70s as well. And in 1983, I stopped climbing because I lost the motivation. So in 1983, I took up, started playing squash to a high standard. And I started windsurfing. And I went potholing, because potholing was easy to go to a high standard because it's only semi-skilled, in my opinion. And
wait a second. What is potholing, Rob?
Oh, potholing is going underground, squirming underground into. It's quite a big sport in the UK. Going through really tight squeezes, and in the UK, the hardest potholes were, say, 18 hours. They were 18 hours to get down to the bottom and back out again. And if something happened below the crux of it, curtains, they can't get you out. So it was really committing. So we did a lot of the hardest potholes in the country.
I'm sorry, that sounds horrible.
Oh, yeah. yeah.
It sounds the exact opposite of climbing big walls in the majestic open skies.
Yes, but at the end of the day, it's just the same because it's a challenge. So getting through a squeeze without getting stuck is a challenge in the same way as doing a hard move on a climb. So it was challenging. And I did a lot of skiing. And I started climbing again in 1990. Sorry, yeah, 1990, after the climbing revolution. So I missed the 80s totally. And when I came back, I couldn't believe how strong climbers were. It was unbelievable. And people were training. Never trained in my life until 1990 when I came back. And when I retired in 2010, I became a full-time athlete and I could train every day. But then, of course, I got injured.
Sure,
Because I trained too hard.
Rob, fascinating. You left climbing, you came back and picked up all of these different sports, and then somehow climbing lured you in.
Yes.
And I want
it's
to
always in my blood.
Yeah, exactly. So I love to say once a climber, like always a climber.
Yeah.
I want to go back in that a little bit, but I feel I do need to ask you about the day you sent the climb.
Yeah.
And talk to us about that morning, right? You have put in all of this preparation. You have gone and inspected the route. You have figured out like what type of gear goes where. You have head pointed, or you have rehearsed the route. So you have put a top rope down and you have rehearsed the moves. And then before that also, you're bringing in all of this knowledge and this buildup over the decades, right?
Yeah.
And you are now standing on the ground. You have your gear on you, you're tied in. What is going through your mind, Rob, as you attempt to set out?
Well, you've got to remember that I went on the route at the end of March first to try and lead it, and I'd arranged for photographers to come down and videographers to come down and people to hold my rope, which was hard to get because a lot of people didn't want to hold my rope. Can't understand that really. The weather was really cold and really windy, but because I had to stop dancing around my handbag. I'd laid it all out on the table. I'd arranged all these people to come down. So I felt I had to go for it. So I went for it in really windy conditions. I was getting buffeted around on the crag and I was freezing. I was freezing. It was horrible weather. So I went for it then, just to get what it's like to get on the sharp end flavour. But I got a bit higher than I thought I would, and I managed just to get the sling over the peg. The wind was blowing the sling all over the place, and if I fell off then, I would have been in trouble. But I managed to get it over, and then I tried to make the crux move, but I fell off.
Goodness.
And an hour later, I had another go.
Hang on. So you fell off, and on this climb, I'm guessing there are different sections. Some sections are more dangerous than others. So this particular place or this fall that you took was perhaps not as bad.
Well, no, it was the crux, but I just managed to hang on to get the sling over the peg. I said I wasn't having a sling on the peg. So I was having to crank up higher to get the sling over the peg. And it took me about 3 goes to get it on over the peg. And I managed to get it over the peg. The photographers were shitting themselves. Craig, my son, was on the other side filming. And all he could hear was his heart going boom, 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 boom. And then, then I exploded off. I fell off. But it was safe to fall off then because I could push it then to try and do the crux move because I'd actually got a sling on the peg. Now, the peg's all right to fall on if you're underneath it because it's all rusted and knackered. And I had a sky hook as well, just a bit down to the side of me. So I fell probably about 30 feet, 40 feet.
Dean Karnazes is one of the most accomplished ultra runners over the last few decades. I asked Dean to take us into one of his toughest races, and I was blown away by his story of planning and executing a race in one of the harshest environments known to man, right at the center of the South Pole in Antarctica. Listen on. Can you talk to us a little bit about how challenging it was to plan and execute a race in some of the harshest environment that we know about?
Yeah, well, I mean, the itinerary was a 10-day itinerary. So I told my wife I'd be back to San Francisco in 10 days, and 30 days later, I stumbled back into town. So I learned a lot about Antarctica and how dangerous it is. Actually, I'll just say dangerous. And looking back at things, it's amazing that we lived through that. I lived through that one, and some of the other runners, because we were stuck on the polar plateau, which is the most remote place on Earth, in negative 25-degree temperatures for 2 weeks, trying to run this race, just waiting for the weather to clear. And in Antarctica, it doesn't always clear. I mean, it rarely clears. We came to learn, but getting to the point where, the organizers saying, "Hey, this is not going to work. We're going to have to go," and us thinking, us runners thinking, "Well, we've been down here for so long. We put so much into this. We're not leaving." Those are the kind of circumstances where people get themselves killed. You're a climber. I mean, it's you're 100 meters from the summit, and the weather turns bad, and your instinct is, I'm so close, I'm just going to go bag that summit, and then you got to get back down. So how many people have lost their lives by doing desperate things like that because they're weighing the stakes and how much they put into it. Like, I'm just going to finish this damn thing. But somehow we were able to do the marathon and get out of there unscathed, if you will, with a little frostbite. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and not only the effort and time that you put into the preparation, but also the fact that that particular opportunity will not likely present itself. Like, how often will you get a chance to go down to that extreme end of the planet and do this? So you kind of have to lay it all on the line. And
well, I mean, there were supposed to be, we were told there'd be 40 to 50 intrepid runners from around the world to run this first ever, South Pole Marathon. And there were 3 of us. Yeah. And, and it was one and done. I mean, there's never been, it was supposed to be the inaugural race, like this ongoing series of runs, marathons to the South Pole. And that was the first and only and ever. It's just too dangerous an operation. They have marathons on Antarctica, but they're at the shoreline, where outside, not near the pole, and the coastline. Because I've run on the coastline of Antarctica as well. It's much more temperate than the interior.
Andy McVitie is one of the best sports physiotherapists in the UK. Andy specializes in rock climbers, but Andy's wisdom applies to practitioners of different kind of sports. In this clip, Andy helps break down some movement drills and gives us a couple of simple exercises we can use to evaluate the health and the range of motion of our shoulders. What is your favorite way to maintain healthy shoulders and range of motion?
If we feel we've lost mobility because we've just not been going there, we've just not used to being there, then it's a balance of most things. So some stretching, encouraging stretching into that area. I think often when people are stretching, they go kind of too hard, really hard into it. So some nice, consistent, static stretching can be useful, pain-free. Also, some work into the end range. So the type of thing maybe where you would lie on the floor with your arms overhead in a Y position, if you're able to do that. Keep the arms super straight and lifting the hands off the floor. So actually actively working against gravity, pulling away. And that's hard to do even with no weights or anything like that at all. But sometimes we can have the range in a shoulder, the actual functional ranges, or the actual range is there within the joint itself, but we haven't got the control, we haven't got the strength to access that, is often kind of the first thing to go. If it's, age-related disuse type issue. So to actually work, do some stretching, then give the shoulder a signal to go into that range under its own steam instead of being helped to get there under its own effort. But one of the best that can be adjusted in various ways is to spend time in a hanging position. And I'm here talking obviously particularly about climbers, but many overhead athletes. If you've got a pull-up bar that you can get feet on the floor and to spend some time in an active position, you can alter that to wherever your comfort level is. You could have feet on a chair, so your body is much more at much less of an angle, rather than being totally vertical, because that can be irritating and painful for shoulders sometimes. And just spending time, we sort of hinted at in the start there that we stop spending time in these ranges, and that's one of the reasons why we can lose range if we're just looking at the age-related, process. The other side of that, really, that we see with shoulders in particular, of difficulty moving them, of pain moving them, that type of thing, is often tendon-related, and that's we spoke last time about strength being super important, which it is. Keep your muscle mass, improve your muscle mass, keep and improve your muscular strength, all of that side of thing, power as well, all of this. But what's just as, if potentially not more important, and I'm going to say just as important, because if you say one's more important than the other, then people ignore the other one. We'll say both. Is the tendons themselves and how we treat those. And hanging is a good example. We tend to hang for time, hang for 20, 30, 45 seconds, something like that. Very good for the joint. That's your kind of stretch, if you like, through into it, but also really good for tendons. And tendons are not a very responsive tissue. A lot of the tendons that that you can have in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, that collagen was laid down when you were a teenager. That's been with you potentially, for 50 or 60 years. The tendon itself, therefore, has much more potential to degenerate, to degrade, than a muscle does. Muscles are constantly being renewed and replenished, and tendons aren't. And it's the fluid around the tendon. Many changes happen in the tendon we can touch on later if you want. But what I will say here is that, we need to spend some time on our tendons as we get older. And isometric work, so static held positions with that tendon under some low to medium level of strain. Doesn't have to be super hard work. Is a really valuable thing to do. And that actually fits in quite nicely, with getting that range back too. So my number one, what would I do, would be to find a way to load in an overhead position that for time that doesn't cause any negative symptoms and build from there. Yeah.
Beautiful, Andy. One thing that I suppose we should quickly cover, which is any simple movement tests or warning signs people should watch out for. Because like I said, I did not keep a close eye on my own mobility degrading, and I'm finding out kind of late. So are there some tests that people can?
So these things do creep up on us. You're quite right. We lose a % here or there, and we sort of don't notice, and the body can adapt around it as well. We can gain extra, or work and bend through our thoracic spine or lumbar spine in order to compensate for overhead mobility loss. We may not even notice it happening. So a super important thing I feel to do is to benchmark, is to find what's normal for you. Various different ways that we can do this. But, the good old, wall angel or a floor angel, that kind of thing. You could video yourself doing a wall angel. For people that don't know, it's where you put your back flat against the wall and you try to put your elbows and your hands against the wall as well, and straighten your arms overhead, pull them back down. Or take a photo of yourself from the side, reaching overhead as high as you can. And reaching behind as well, as far as you can. So you've got something to reference it against. Now, this isn't something that you would then check every week to see what's going on. It's not worth spending your time with that. But every year, give it your New Year MOT, we would say in the UK, which is the annual sort of safety check that your car has, an MOT. It's a term that we use here as sort of like to check everything's okay, everything's running all right. You change your oil, you change, all the service it, that type of thing. You give yourself a once over at the start of every year, be that start of training season, start of climbing season, whatever works for you, or the new year, just because that's a time when people often are thinking about these kind of things. And just look, and that can be then you could look at your split. You could look at your, whatever movement that you think, and just take a photo. We've all got the digital, data to, storage now, and then compare each year.
Jerry Moffat has been one of the most influential rock climbers of the generation before us. In this evocative clip, Jerry talks about the story of on sighting Equinox, a world-class crack climb in Joshua Tree at the tail end of his competitive career. Nobody had on-sighted. Nobody had even had the gumption to try on-sighting Equinox, a climb so difficult. Nobody had even attempted what Jerry set out to do. His ascent of the climb was so visionary. But what makes this story compelling is not just the ascent, but the whole story, the mindset, the flow state, the decision to go all in, all alone, far from home. Yes, it is absolutely one of Jerry's climbing career's most defining ascents. You on-sighted.
Yeah.
Did that route first try.
Yeah.
Without knowing what the route was like, without any prior pre-inspection, Jerry, you on-sighted that route. So talk to us a little bit about both
I can tell you about the
focus.
yeah, I can tell you how the mindset. So 6 months before, I met a guy called Randy Bogle, who had written the guidebook for Joshua Tree. He came to England. I was 19. I've not been to America yet. He'd never heard of me. I said to him, what about this route Equinox? I really want to go to Joshua Tree and try Equinox. And he said to me, he was a good friend of Becker's, he said, forget it. There's no way you're going to do Equinox. He said, you cut your fingers to shreds. It took John Becker 3 days to top rope it. You've got no chance. That's what he said. So then I was like, I've really got to do this route. Back then, did I think it was not conceivable? I'd have been happy if I'd done it in 2 days. But then when I went to Joshua Tree, I was there for 3 months. I became a very good friend of John Becker, and I did a lot of climbing with John. He saw me climbing, and he was the one who gave me the idea to try and on-site it. Without him, I don't think I'd have tried to on-site it. But he said to me one day, you know what, I think you could on-site Equinox. So then I had it as a goal to on-site Equinox. So then I spent over a month just training to do Equinox. There's some boulder problems there with finger jams. So I'd be doing these boulder problems up and down when reversing them, all on these finger jams. I was doing road ladders, traversing. I was eating a fantastic diet. I don't think in all my life, I don't think I've ever peaked for a climb better than when I did Equinox. I was so fired up. I was so fired up. It was before half friends were made. So the smallest size you could get was a number 1. John Becker lent me a half friend, so I had this one friend I could put in the crack. And I can remember leading it. I climbed up, reversed down, shook out. Then I went up a little bit more, put some wires in, got to a little shakeout. I remember thinking, shall I put the half friend in? I thought, no, I'll save it. And I was so psyched and so fired up. I just ran it out. But one nut and I went. And I just went for it, ran it out. And I reckon if they'd stacked another Equinox on top, I think I'd have done that as well. And it felt pumped and absolutely, I absolutely cruised it. I pissed up it. I felt so good, but I was so psyched up and ready for it and so fit. I think I'd had 2 rest days before. On my rest days, I was doing probably 10, I was just climbing all down easy routes. So I'd do solely loads of 5s, 8s and 5 7s. So I was doing loads and loads of easy mileage. And then my training days, I was doing ladders, pull-ups, dead hands, traversing, bouldering, crack climbing. So back then there wasn't anywhere to train better. It was before climbing walls and anything like that. So I was really, really fired up for that route. And it was, a big thing for me. And John was there with his camera. He documented it and got some great photos. So it was a special day to go there with John Becker and, have him take photos of you. It was really good, and he was very generous to encourage me to do that.
Jerry, was that one of those rare days you would break from tradition of, drinking tea and perhaps go to the local bar, Joshua Tree, and grab some pints?
No, I never drank alcohol. If I had money, I would have, but I never had the money. I never had the money to drink alcohol or go to a restaurant or anything. We were in such a huge dream. It was pre-sponsorship, pre-sponsored climbing. We absolutely had done a shoestring. But I never drank alcohol then. If somebody gave me a beer, I'd have had it. But then I can honestly remember never going to the shop and buying a can of beer. It was way too expensive. You wouldn't even have a meal in a restaurant. Yeah, well, you might have a coffee because it was free refills, and that was pretty incredible. But that was about it.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, no, so you put an incredible amount of really comprehensive preparation for this route. Like, you saw the route, you were inspired, you talked to others, it like lit this fire in you, and you put all this time at Joshua Tree preparing for it. When you went to the route, you were physically completely ready. At the same time, you also had the mental state to be able to execute.
Yeah.
And I think this is
something that perhaps separates, let's say, the very, very top climbers from the rest of us, where, we do all of the same things, but then when we get to the climb itself, we may choke, right? We may get we in that balance between, let's say, focus versus expectation, we might like lose that balance. And maybe that's also something that you talk about in your newer book, Mastermind.
Yeah.
The whole mental.
Yeah.
So talk to us, Jerry, a little bit about the mental side of your preparation, where you would get to this route and you would do it. And I would also love for you to maybe compare, contrast, whatnot, with similar techniques that you've studied in other top climbers, such as, let's say, Adam Onra, master of on-sighting and flashing. Like, what are these things that you guys have, and what can the rest of us learn from them?
I think when I went to Equinox, for one, John Becker told me he thought I could on-sight it. So I've got somebody who says, I bet you can on-sight that. So I know it's possible because John Becker's told me and he's done it. So then I can start to visualize it and think of myself on-sighting it because he thinks it and he thinks that he can do it. So then I think it and then I thought about it. So when I was at the bottom of the route, I truly believed that I could on-sight it. I didn't know whether I was or not, but I knew that I was in the best shape of my life. I knew that I had a good chance of doing it. So I was confident, and that confidence was instilled into me by John Becker and myself talking about myself on-sighting it with John Becker, thinking about it and visualizing it. So we talked about on-sighting it. I visualized it, and that instilled the confidence. So if you try to do something, I would say the more you talk about, think about, and write about something doing, the more likely you are to actually on-sight it. And Adam Ondra is no different from all the other climbers. He's got it. He's a little bit different. He's got a really good attitude about being confident and just preparing things. He's confident and he thinks about things in the right way. I mean, if you get to the bottom of the route and you've got any doubt and you think you're not going to do it, it's going to be a lot harder to do it. So you really want to be visualizing things. I would say the one thing I learned from writing the book, you don't want to be optimistic. You want to be pessimistic. You want to be pessimistic about everything before you go to that route. Because if you're optimistic, you're going to think to yourself, don't really need to train about that. Don't really need to think about that. Where's the crux? It doesn't really matter. I'll probably just probably just do it. You want to be pessimistic. So you want to go, where's the crux? I've got to find out where that is. What's going to happen if that goes wrong? What happens if that goes wrong? What happens if I get pumped there? These are all the things that you need to think about prior to going to the route. Being that pessimistic beforehand can lead you to being optimistic when you get there. So when you stand at the bottom of the route, you know, what happens if you get pumped? Well, my fitness is good and I can shake out anywhere and nobody's better than me in the world at shaking out. What happens if I read the route wrong? Well, that's probably not going to happen because nobody reads climbs better than me. What happens if my foot pops in one of the moves? Well, I know that my foot pops doesn't make any difference because I can remember that climb I did 2 weeks ago, my foot popped and I still did it. I know I'm ready for it and I've thought about everything and I know what how I'm going to deal with all those things. So I would say be pessimistic, think about all the things that could go wrong, how you will deal with those things going wrong when you're on an actual climb. So when you're at the bottom of that climb, you can go, I thought about everything that can go wrong and I know that I can deal with every single one of them and still do the climb. That's how you get to that position.
We end today's episode with a voice that surprised me because of what he didn't say. Neil Gresham is one of the most respected climbing coaches in the UK. He's trained everyone from weekend warriors to elite athletes, and he's known for his rigor, honesty, and depth. When I asked Neil about training aging climbers like Rob Matheson, who we heard from earlier, Neil prepared Rob for a bold E7 at age 74. I expected him to talk about limitations. Instead, he flipped the script. The clip is not about climbing. It's about what happens when we stop assuming decline is inevitable and start meeting people where they are, regardless of age. Neil's message might just be the quiet magic bullet we all need to hear.
I think what I'm going to say here might surprise you. Coaching Rob was no different to coaching anyone else. If I'd never been able to actually see him and see that he looks like an older guy, if I'd just, like only ever spoken to him on the phone, say, or I'd seen video of him climbing and hadn't seen his face, he's no different to anyone else. And I think that's the magic of it. Sure, he's got his weaknesses, he's half crimp, he needed to do some work on that, needed to troubleshoot that a bit. He had a grumbly upper back, sort of rhomboid type injury that needed a little bit of careful handling. Just sounds like the next climber to me. I'm not aware that this guy's 74. He could be 24. He's certainly got the outlook of a 24-year-old. I didn't have to, manage this guy. I didn't go to this guy, oh, you're 74. Oh, maybe you should just do a few stretches and a few push-ups and just go and do a few 6As at the wall. I trained him like I'd train anyone else.
Yes, that is true. Even though, yes, some of us would be hoping for some kind of a magic bullet, but no, I think it is exactly that. Like Rob or anybody else.
I've just given you the magic bullet. That was the magic bullet. And that's why I answered it that way. That's the positive message. You're not going to have some coach like making these. You see, I wrote those articles in the, I don't know if you ever saw what I wrote on this subject in the early nought, so Rock and Ice magazine, when I was their correspondent. I wrote these totally demotivating training articles saying, the older you get, the less you should do. Oh, you shouldn't train strength because you might get a finger injury. Oh, don't do long endurance sessions because you won't recover, because your recovery's like totally gone. In fact, you might as well just give up. I wrote those articles. I was wrong. I wrote those articles because there was no data. There were no Rob Mathesons around to prove that like climbers are like in that film, that film with Brad Pitt, Benjamin Button, climbers keep getting better as they get older. I didn't know that back then. I just went on what they were saying in other sports. I looked at you look at all these depressing decline curves, and I just applied that to climbing. But I am so glad that I was so wrong, and I'm the living proof of that in my own climbing, and so are all the older athletes that I've worked with. And that's why I'm quite proud to say that I didn't treat Rob Matheson differently to how I would treat anyone else. Sure, I gave him the right amount of work, and the overall amount of load to suit him, but not because of his age, because he's who he is, and some climbers will tell me they can train 3 days in a row, no problem. Some climbers will say to me, they have to go day on, day off. Some will say they can do 2 days on, 1 day, everybody's different. And it's more just down to individuality than age. I don't particularly see the pattern. I don't see an age-related pattern. I've noticed, that a lot of the people come to me of all ages who say that they've tried to follow some crazy plan that they heard about that, Alex Megos was doing, or like some top superhero climber was doing. They tried to follow this plan and they got overtrained and they got shut down. But they didn't say that because of their age. They just, you know, like it's just genetic susceptibility. So I think we all have to find, I think we all have to find the right rhythm and tempo for our training. And this is something that I try and do with every person. You know, obviously it's the key thing that I do with everybody who I train. But I don't make some like sweeping assumption, oh, you're 74, I'm going to give you 1 half-hour training session a week. I don't do that.
That's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Ageless Athlete podcast. I hope you enjoyed this show just as much as I enjoyed creating and producing it. Whether you are an athlete looking to push your limits or someone striving to maintain a healthy, active lifestyle as you age, there is always something new to learn. From Ageless Athlete, we bring you a fresh episode each and every week. If you liked what you heard, we would love it if you would take a moment to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an update. And if you really liked what you heard, please leave us a review, crush those 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. It helps us reach more people who are passionate about staying strong and resilient, no matter their age. Don't forget to visit our website and leave your email so I can send you occasional insights, stories, and tips to keep you inspired and motivated on your journey. You can also follow us on Instagram at Ageless Athlete Podcast and on YouTube at Ageless Athlete Podcast as well for even more great content. All of these links are available on the show notes for this episode. This show is entirely produced by me, Kush Khandelwal, based out of California with the help of my trusted adventure pup Roger. Until next time, keep challenging yourself. Keep pushing those limits. Stay mentally and physically fit. Continue doing what you love to do. And my friends, stay ageless.
Friends, this is not an ad. This is just a quick message to those amongst us who are listening to Ageless Athlete podcast for the first time. I would love it if you would hit subscribe and follow on your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or Stitcher or Overcast or what have you. We bring you stories and routines and other inspiration from elites in the world of the best outdoor sports. In each episode, you will find how these athletes stay connected to the outdoors, maintain peak performance, and continue to thrive as they age. I encourage you to look through Brad episodes and listen to a couple and see if they resonate. And then, come back next week. We release an episode each week. And I am really inspired to bring you some of the best stories from the world of the outdoors. Okay, back to the show.